Another cousin of mine by the name of Joe Tiemann. His mother had the same difficult problem as my mother had. She was married, divorced, and she had a young boy who was a year older than I. And my grandmother wound up taking care of both of us. I had two uncles by the name of Ed Black and Bill Black. They had went in the Marine Corps in 1933. And every time they would come home, they'd always bring me some type of Marine Corps thing, like a leather belt or a pair of leggings or a hat, and he'd say, "Here, Eddie, this is for you." I used to get a big kick out of that. I thought these guys were the greatest things walking. My mother was going around with an Italian fellow whom my grandmother disliked. Evidently, my grandmother didn't think too much of Italian. There was a thing, people with the blacks and with the Irish and the Italians, and evidently she didn't like the Italians. So she got in an argument with my mother. And she says, "Here, you take your son back then." So they took me away from my grandmother's house, or my mother did, and put me into foster home. I must have been in, I'm going to say, at least 10 or 12 foster homes. This mischief night, right, we were in there. Of course, we weren't allowed out of the house, but we sat around a table and we were making drawings and cutting them out. And the woman by the name of Mrs. Dillon was very nice. She used to treat the kids good, and we really liked her. Her husband had just died prior to us getting there, and he was buried in the cemetery out in the rear of the house. And every morning she used to go out to the cemetery and visit his grave. And she'd come in and wake us up for school and feed us our breakfast, and we'd go off to school. So it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and next thing I know, we heard a freight train going by. So we all jumped up and we said, "Boy, how come we should have been out here going to school?" So they wondered where Mrs. Doan was. So we all ran outside, we got dressed, we went out into the cemetery in the rear looking for her. She wasn't out there. And at that time, she used to have a little garden that she grew different fruits and vegetables in it. And she wasn't there either. So we decided that we would go back to the house, make our breakfast with cereal and milk, and go to school. So as we went back into the house, one of the boys opened the door to the cellar to get the cereal off the shelf, and he let out a scream. And of course, we all ran to the cellar door to see what they were screaming about. And there she was. She had hung herself in the Douglas cellarway. And I don't know what they paid, but I imagine they paid something like $6 a week to the individual that took me in. And these people that took kids in were more or less surviving themselves. Maybe they've lost their husbands and so forth, and they're looking for extra money. She'd come over on a Saturday and visit me, and all of a sudden she'd just pack me up and say, "Come on, we're going, I'm getting you out of here." And she maybe had an argument with the woman, and that's how I kept moving from place to place, because every time somebody would treat you kind of bad, I'd get my mother and I'd tell them that they were doing this and doing that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I got moved around so often. 1939, my mother married John Birdie, who was my stepfather, and they bought a house at 61st and Thompson. And they brought me with them. Then at that particular time, he said, "Come on, you're going to come with us."
We used to go to St. Donata's Church up at 65th and Calla in West Philly. So since we were neighbors, and naturally, once we found out we both went there, we used to go up together very often. And sometimes we'd keep on walking up to Cobbs Creek Park and go play in the woods instead of going to our catechism class.
My father became a air raid warden, or stepfather, and Al and I became messengers, what they called messengers in them days. We used to wear an armband with a lightning, stroke of lightning across the armband, and we used to go to the police station, and whenever messages had to be delivered to different houses or different air raid wardens, we had to take the message in an envelope and run up to the house, knock on the door, and give them the message.
One time he killed a couple birds with his BB gun, and he came and laid them on our front step, thinking my mother would cook them, you know. So they were only tiny little things. They wouldn't have made much of a meal for a family of 8, so we kind of just threw them in the garbage.
Movies was, I think it was 11 cents at them days. And sometimes your parents would give you the 11 cents to go, and sometimes you have to bum a couple of pennies off of somebody else or whatever in order to get to the movies.
Ed and I were out for a Sunday drive up Westchester Pike, and there was another car with a couple of young guys in it that decided they wanted to play tag with us. And Ed was just out for a ride, didn't want any problems. And finally, the guy cut us off once they started playing tag with us, and Ed was getting annoyed. So finally, Ed pulled over and cut him off and got out of the car and pulled the driver out of the car. He was about ready to beat up on him when the cops came and took Ed and locked him up.
My uncle Ed Black went over the hill, and he was AWOL. So he came home, and the Marine Corps was looking for him because he was absent without leave, and they finally caught him. And the MPs came and locked him up and took him back to, I think it was the Marine barracks down at the Navy Yard. They put him in jail for 3 months, and they gave him a dishonorable discharge. By the time I'm 16 years old, I'm like in the 7th and a half grade, quite old. And everybody said, well, look at this big dummy coming in here. I wanted to get the hell away from there, and I just packed up and ran away from home. It was me and another fella, young boy. I think we got maybe about 15 miles from home, and they put out a bulletin or somebody that we were runaways, and the police picked us up and brought us back to the police station again. And my father came over and said, what the hell did you do that for? What'd you run away for? I said, I don't know, I just wanted to get away. And I don't know to this day why I did it. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I think we were headed for North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And that was a Marine Corps base. And I don't know what we were going to do down there, but I know, pretty sure we were headed there. I went down to, I think it was 2nd Street in Philadelphia, where the recruiting office was. And they said, you need your mother's signature on this, or your parents' signature. And they says, yeah, okay. So I signed my mother's signature on it, brought it back, and they says, nah. He says, you signed this paper. Your parents didn't sign that paper. You better take it back and get them to sign it. So he gave me another paper. And I went back and I explained to my mother, I said, look, I got to go. I can't stay here. You better sign it because I'm going to shove off one way or the other. So I think she talked to my stepfather, and he says, go ahead, sign it. Let him go. So they did. And I entered the Marine Corps.
Well, I met Ed in 1946 in North China, Tientsin. And that's where the 1st Marine Division had left when they left Okinawa. And they were supposed to go to Japan and have a raid on Japan, but since the bombers dropped, they pulled the troops off the island after the war was over and sent them into Tientsin. And in 1945, actually, they had signed an armistice. They had signed a treaty with the Chinese people to remove the Japanese. They were still in China. And that's when the Marines came in there and more or less threw them out. And that's how the Marines stayed there from, well, from 45 to 49. They were very slick people, those Chinese. When you shake a hand with a Chinaman over there, you got to take your ring off and take your wallet out of your pocket and then shake their hands, because if you don't, they got it. They're really, really shrewd people.
I started to train, and finally I had 3 or 4 fights, or I don't know, 5 or 6 fights after that. And we used to fight troops from the Navy and other Marine units who had boxers, and subsequently I won on what they called it, was a bullshit thing, but it was what they called the North China title.
We would go into town and go on Liberty. There's different cabarets there, which was nice. We used to drink vodka and beer, you know, and very cheap. Pay $1 for a pint of vodka and 60 cents for a quart of beer. So we used to get drunk on $1.60. I mean, that's the cheapest load on I ever got. And as soon as we got into town, we would walk from the barracks. I mean, about a 2 or 3 mile walk. And there's one old, well, I don't know how old he was, but he must have been a giant. He was the biggest Chinaman I ever seen. And they say he used to be a wrestler at one time. And he was all hunched over. He'd bring his hand out to you and he says, "Niki wa kamasho." That means, give me money. He was begging for money. And I later found out that the Japanese had broken his back. That's why he was hunched over like that.
And we did a lot of patrol work up into the mountains areas because the Chinese communists were sending troops in there, and we were always robbing our gear and cans of gasoline and oil and so forth. And even though we had guards around, they always managed to slip in and to steal this material. And I was with a patrol that used to patrol up into the mountains in the evening. And one night while we're up there must have been maybe 10 or 15, I call them yobos, but they were communist men, Chinese men, who had just stolen 5-gallon cans of gasoline. And they were carrying them through the mountains in single file. We saw them, and with a friend of mine, Dick Titian, and 2 other lads. We finally jumped on them, and we captured one of them. The rest of them dropped the cans, and they hid in the bushes and so forth. And we were pretty perturbed because we only caught the one guy.
Then I got to realize there's no animals in the city. You don't find no dogs, no cats, you don't find no 4-legged animals walking that city streets. Until I realized that one day when we went up to the station with our dog King, it was in the summertime. And we had him up there, and this Chinese soldier said, "There was Niki wa ku," means give me your dog. I says, "No." I said, "You're not going to get this dog." Oh. We walked around the side of the station there, and there had 3 dogs up there skinned, gutted and skinned. You know, they're going to eat them. I said, "Marshal, no wonder they don't have any animals. They eat all the animals."
One day every week, they had a public execution of everyone. And these people would kneel down, and the executioner would come up and lop their heads off. Never struggled. The ones who were being executed, you think they would have at least tried to run or do something, but they just knelt right down and took it. She had long hair, cute little girl. I didn't figure I'd have much time with her anyway. Of course, I guess everybody else was looking at her. She went to Immaculata College, and she went to Catholic schools. She was pretty well disciplined. And I think she knew where she was going. She was heading in the right direction. She knew where she wanted to go, as far as work was concerned, as far as what she wanted to do in business and so forth. And me, I still wasn't sure where the hell I was heading. But I think I knew she was, and I appreciated that fact because I figured somebody's got to control me. And there's only going to be one person going to control me, and it's somebody if I love them and they want to do what they say, and I really did. I love my wife, and I know she was a squared away person. And anyway, we got along pretty good. And we decided to get married in 1950. Korean War broke out, and I was called back in along with a fellow by the name of, well, Crawford was his name, but he was a captain at the time. He was in my reserve unit, and we were called back to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. My wife used to go out in the evening. She got with my cousin's wife, who was also Marine, and really nothing that they ever did, but my mother used to give stories to me. Oh, your wife was out there. She come home 2 o'clock in the morning. What's she doing? Blah, 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 blah. And then she started to put a lot of doubts in my head. And I used to accuse my wife of, what are you doing going out? I'm down here at Camp Lejeune, da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, one word led to another. Words got bigger, and my mother made things worse than what they actually were. And at the time, I never realized it. So my wife and I, we separated, and my first son was born. There was a lot of information going about the communists are doing this, the communists are doing that. They're taking over this country, they're taking over the other countries. But I wasn't so much concerned about the communism part of it. I think with my marriage breaking up, and I was pretty devastated at the time, and I decided, well, I just wanted to get away from everything again. I guess I'm running again. I don't know.
The men who went to Korea were a different breed. We lived in the shadow of older brothers, uncles, fathers who went to World War II. And we went to the movies. We watched, Bataan Death March. We watched Wake Island and all these movies, preparing us for really our role. We had an enemy probe. They were trying to take outpost all along the western half of Korea. And we had a probe. It was March 19th. And between March 19th and the morning of March 20th, our 3rd Squad, 3rd Platoon of H-31, which we used to call HOW Company. These days they refer to it as Hotel Company. But we lost 6 men of our 12-man squad on the outpost, which is how Eddie Crawford came into being in our company. I had a great buddy by the name of Jim Hilton, who was a great combat Marine, and it wasn't long before he told me that, Eddie Crawford is about the best, most professional squad leader we have ever had. Even his boxing experience, how to feint, how to move, to cover the flanks, all of that came into play. We lived in bunkers, and the one thing about the bunkers is that the place was infested with rats. And frankly, I was young and kind of gung-ho, so I wasn't as frightened of the Chinese as I was of the rats. You would wake up, and there'd be a huge rat on your chest, and you're wondering, was he just about to gnaw on my nose or what?
The 3 of us took off that night, crossed the rice paddies, which was maybe 500-600 yards, and approached the base of this hill called Betty Grable. And as we approached the hill and started to move up the hill, we faced, all of a sudden, it was hordes of Chinese that was coming over the crest of the hill and coming right down towards us. And there was a kid, Sergeant Taggart. I was a Corporal Taggart from Camden, New Jersey. He said, listen, he says, what do we do, Sergeant? I said, turn around and run. We got to get the hell out of here. So we ran down the hill towards the rice paddy again, and they started shooting at us and throwing grenades at us. And one of the kids was killed. The other guy got shrapnel in the ass. I got hit in the leg, and Chinese came over. I just played dead. The two of us played dead, and the other guy was dead. And we laid there all that night and the next day.
On the last hill, which was a pretty bad hill, he was in a position which had been overrun on either side. So they didn't know if they were alone, and some of his men said we should be pulling back. He said, no, we've got to hold this position because it's important to the outcome of what happens on the hill. And I had gotten hit, and I was up at the aid station. Paul Carlton, who was in the 3rd Squad, was there, and he was hit. But he refused to be sent back, as I did, and he went over and picked up a case of grenades and took them back down. He said, Eddie's going to need these. So, I mean, everything was always that way. Even pictures of him around the troops, it was I don't know, it's just a standard of leadership. He never forced things. His style was almost like you didn't want to disappoint him because it would be like disappointing your father or something. But Lieutenant Lutz ran the 3rd Platoon up. They weren't supposed to go into the trenches because it would be too crowded. There were a lot of dead Chinese, a lot of dead Marines, and too much artillery. And there's where I think Ed shined, because he told the lieutenant, he said, you've got to keep the men under cover. You can't insist that they go into the trenches now. This lieutenant was, not so much he was gung-ho, but he graduated from Annapolis, and he was looking for a career, if you will. And he got mad at Ed, and he ran. He said, I'll do it myself. He ran out to the trench, and he got hit. Not badly, but hit. So he came back in, basically said, you know, the NCO was right. He knew what he was talking. He had experience.
Myself and another man was in a hole, foxhole. It was a rather, when I say a foxhole, it was probably chest high. You could stand up and fire over the top of the hole. The Chinese were throwing grenades at us, and we were picking the grenades up and throwing them back out again. And they were also firing 81 mortars and things of that nature at us. And there was a man next to me. It was an explosion, and I look over, and this guy's head was gone. He had his 2 hands on the parapet of the hole, and the blood was coming out. He lifted his hand up, and where his head would have been, he's trying to find his head. And I knocked it. It just froze me up, boy. And I went down in the bottom of the hole, and I says, and he just collapsed and died. And I don't know how long I laid there, for quite a while, I guess. And I realized that I just lost all my ambition to fight. And even you lose all your ambition. Well, anyway, I realized that I couldn't stay that way. You had to get up and you had to live. And I thought, what the hell can I do to get out of this situation? And I don't know, I saw a picture, I don't know what it's called, it says Iwo Jima with John Wayne and all that bullshit. And then I'm realizing that I figured myself in a picture, and everybody's looking at me. And he said, "Look at that yellow son of a bitch." And I just couldn't have it. I just forced myself to get up, and I don't know how it did that, but I just felt that everybody was looking at me, laying there and being a coward and all that bullshit. And then you start to thinking you're letting the other guys down, your buddies down, who need you. And finally, I got up and I got the rifle and I started firing and shooting and all that shit. And
He just doesn't seem to get flustered. It's wherever, whatever is, when it's hitting the fan, he's more or less relaxed, and so that's infectious. Everybody else, if they look to the leader and he seems scared, then they're going to be frightened. But in his case, he never showed it. Not that he wasn't. I don't know. I assume he must have been at times.
I got shrapnel in this leg here again. And I told the guys that we didn't know the war was going to end on the 27th, but I said, look, if we come under attack too many more times, they're going to, I think there was only 12 or 14 of us left out of the company. And we had one tank in support of us. I said, everybody write a letter home, and I'm going to put it in an ammo box and give it to the tanker. And if we get overrun, the tanker will make sure everybody gets their last letter home.
There's a great picture of just the remnants of the men. I mean, you start out with 272 men, and there were maybe 42. So there we were, and there's Eddie, and we, each of us had gone to aid stations or something if you had been hit. And I went back to Able Med, and I shaved up, came back, and I saw a supply truck with dry socks, so I grabbed them and took them back to the guys. And as I was going up the hill, a life photographer was coming down. I said, wait till you see it up there. Because I was already shaved up and cleaned up.
And at 9 o'clock, we fired green and red flares, and the Chinese fired their green and flares and white flares up, signifying that that was the truce, the end of the war. The truce had started. And of course, we thought that was our last day anyway, but fortunately the war ended, and everybody was hugging each other and smoking cigarettes out in the open and crying. Everybody was just tickled to death that the war was over.
Last night, we stopped firing at 10 o'clock, and everything sounded so peaceful. It felt like you were in heaven itself. Guys just sat down and cried like babies, and they weren't ashamed of it all. I never thought any man could sit through so much hell for so long and still come out in his right mind. I never saw so many gooks in my life as I saw them that night. They came at us in swarms. We kept cutting them down, and they still came. They overran our trenches, 9:30 one night, and we didn't get them out until 3:30 the next afternoon. They brought chow and ammo with them. I guess they thought they would be able to hold, but they didn't. They overran us in 3 nights in a row, and every night was the same. Guys were stabbing, thrusting, and beating them over the heads with their rifle butts. I guess the gooks wanted to give one more big try before they signed the truce. Well, I guess I will close for now, so take it easy. Believe me, I am all right, so don't worry. All my love, Bud.
And as the nights went on, we were out hooting and howling. We just kept having a ball. But he said, well, we'll go here and see the temple, and let's rent an actual Japanese home, so we're not in the run-of-the-mill R&R hotel. So we went out into the suburbs, and we rented a Japanese home, and that's where we stayed for about 5 more days. And a little Japanese man, probably from World War II, in riding jotfras, he'd come around, write things in his little pad, and Bill and I met these gals My girl was Aiko Mimasako, never forget her name. And we had a little conversation, you know. It wasn't a question of Ed's manliness, but we thought, you know, you think he's too old for this or something? He was 25, we thought he was an old man. We were walking by a photography studio, and Ed said, come on, let's go have our picture taken together. So it was he, Bill Hansford, and me, and we went up. And in a million years, I would never have thought to go into a studio, and we had one of those old-fashioned studio shots taken. And it's one of my, I have many good photographs, but that's one of my most treasured. I think that's great, just the three of us.
Dad was away in a service at the time, and he would continually send letters to her that she would refuse to open. For some reason, her mother would keep them, and finally insisted that she open these letters and find out what he had to say. And in doing that, it was shortly before he was ready to come home, and she did agree to see him again so that he could see Eddie, because he hadn't seen Eddie since he was born. And I guess it just rekindled their relationship, and shortly after that, they got remarried. She never wanted to recognize the fact that they were ever divorced. As far as she was concerned, their first wedding at St. Alice's Church was a huge formal wedding, and that was it. In the eyes of God, she was married then, and I don't even know the date of their second one, because she refused to ever let anybody know.
And as times changed and people got better jobs and got a little bit more money, they moved a little bit further out of the city into Upper Darby. And I called it for years the Great Migration. It seemed like everybody from the neighborhoods in West Philly moved out to the neighborhoods in Upper Darby, and everybody knew the same families, and they grew up with I was one of 9 kids. You know, Stevie Thomas was another gym member and on the board of directors, one of 10 kids. And just about every family on the block, you know, had 6, 7, 8 kids. You couldn't walk out of your door with a ball in your hand and not have 2 teams. I mean, it just happened. And rightly or wrongly, proudly or not so proudly, the Irish are pretty much known for 2 things, drinking and fighting.
When I was a policeman out here, there was a lot of kids from around this neighborhood that were always coming up and were getting into trouble. They were fighting each other, and they had little small gangs, and there was nothing for us to do.
My father died when I was 11, and things weren't real easy. It was like that kind of environment, you know, hanging on corners, getting in trouble, being juvenile detention home, fighting in there, always fighting, you know. So it was kind of like a way for me to express myself, you know, because you weren't like the biggest guy on the block or anything. You know, sometimes people pick when you want to get recognition.
Federal grant money was starting to be available for police units that helped do things for kids of that nature. And I think we received a good deal of money for that.
He showed me the place where he wanted to start the gym right here, and it was a garage. It was a parking garage where they would fix cars and all, and it had kerosene heaters in here, and holes in the floor, but he had a heavy bag, and he knocked the heads off of some parking meters and tied them up with ropes and got a wrestling mat, and that was his ring.
Ed connected with this community. He connected with the young Irish guys. He connected with the boxing, and all of us, in one way or another, all the young guys who got involved in the PAL program, who came in contact with him, could relate to him in some way.
And even though at the time I was only a boy, he made me believe that I was a man. He gave me inspiration in ways that he made me believe that I could go out there and win, that I could do well in school, that I could stand up to the bad guys, that I could accomplish things that other people could not accomplish. He was a great motivator. He would yell, he would scream, he would curse, and he would get you in the right track. He was also the kind of guy that if you were talking to him and he knew that you were lying, he would call you on it. And if he knew you were in trouble, he would sit down and talk to you and counsel you and try to point you back in the right direction.
Dad's kind of a free spirit. Mom's got that quality, but she was always very reserved about it. And she was the one that would kind of keep everything together, keep everybody in place, and but always allowed Dad the freedom he needed to do the things he did, because he was just the type of person that was involved in anything he could be involved in when it came to helping anybody. We had many house guests over the years due to him helping them for whatever reason. And she was just gracious about it all the time. She just had an understanding of him in such a way that I don't know that many other women would have put up with it.
If you were missing from the gym for a period of time, that's normally because I was out doing things that I should not have been doing, drinking, partying, hanging with the wrong crowd. And he'd track you down. He'd find you on the corners and drag you into the car and give you hell. Just like, what the hell are you doing with your life? Why aren't you at the gym? Why aren't you going to school? Why are you hanging around with these guys that are getting in trouble?
Okay, you might not listen to your father or your mother tell you that, but you might listen to Eddie tell you. If for no other reason than he was a tough guy. You knew he had boxed in the Marines. You knew he'd been to war. You knew he'd been a cop. You knew he'd been out in the streets, and you knew the guy could handle himself. And you knew he knew his way around. So you might listen to him, and that's a lot of what he founded here.
I was living in Philadelphia, living in a real bad apartment, and when I started boxing, Eddie said, "Look, you can't live there. You got to come live with me." So he moved me into his house, and I lived there for probably 6 months until I got on my feet and got a place, decent place to go.
Easter Sunday, 1972, was a week before the finals, the Golden Glove finals, and the gym was closed. Of course, he opened the gym up on Easter Sunday, and he got in the ring with me so I could get some boxing in. And he was telling me, throw punches hard at me, try to take my head off. So I tried to throw some hard punches at him, and then he started moving his head and showing me all kinds of stuff defensively. And that always stuck with me. I picked up all those moves, and I always knew that I couldn't get hurt in the ring because I was so well taught.
Once you're in the ring, it shows. If you're not doing your training, any other sport you just lose. Boxing, you get beat up.
Boxing is a very disciplined sport. To most people, it's simple mayhem, but there's a tremendous amount of discipline that goes into the training and conditioning required to box properly. I mean, any two fools can slug each other, and that's not boxing, that's brawling. But boxing, learning how to hit and not get hit, learning how to defend yourself, learning how to box in a true amateur style, score points, win the approval of the judges, the referee. It's a skill. to a lot of us who have been engaged in this sport most of our lives, it's an art form.
He had a place up the mountains that he started years ago, his first place up in Harrisburg. And I think he enjoyed getting away because it took him out of the town and it took him upstate, and he would just work on the cabin, building his home. And I think that was peaceful for him. As much as you or I may look at it as hard work, he enjoyed the separation of what he was doing here in Upper Darby to be able to just get away and do his own thing. And he's a mountain kind of guy. He loves the woods and nature and everything about it. So I think for him to be able to get away and do that was his way of relaxing. And I don't see that he relaxed too much anywhere else. He was kind of what you'd say always on alert for life. And I think you're trained that way as an officer, for one thing, and you're also trained that way as a soldier. So, you know, even in his private life, he was somewhat always on alert.
But having said all that, it's a way for us to connect with young men and teach them a little bit about discipline, teach them a little bit about self-respect and self-confidence, and hopefully impart to them that if they can come and they can follow this discipline and this program, they can learn from that and take that skill somewhere else and apply it to something else.
I remember one day, and I was older then. I was maybe 20, maybe 19, I'm not sure. Myself and two other guys, we were going to hold up a liquor store. We parked the car. My friend and I got out. We went to the liquor store. And we had a gun tucked in our shirt pocket, in our waist. And somebody came in, and they were looking around. They were going to buy liquor. And I looked at my friend. I said, we better go outside and see if we got enough money together. Made some excuse to leave the store. We went out and sat in his car, and we says, you know what? We better not do this because we're going to get in trouble. Suppose that guy's got a gun. What are we going to do then? I said, we're going to have to shoot him.
Being around boxing as long as I've been around, I can't ever remember one fight that I ever had that I wasn't deathly nervous before the fight. But Eddie just always had a way of, you know, calming you down and making you feel all right, and you were good to go. And I always believed that no matter whoever I was up against, that there's no way that his trainer could have ever taught him the way that Eddie Crawford ever taught me. So I was never going to lose. I had Eddie in my side, and I was going to, you know, and I never did. With Eddie in my corner, I never did. I won all of my fights.
Well, we left, and we never did come back another time. But I remember many times I've thought about that. I just supposing I would have went in that store, and the guy would have pulled a gun, or the guy would have tried to muscle us around or something. Would we have shot him? Probably yes.
The first time I was ever on an airplane was when Eddie packed us all up and we went to the Nationals in New Orleans. And we stayed at the Fountain Blue Hotel. We stayed with Chi Rodriguez, Arnold Palmer, Lee Trevino, all these golfers, because they had the U.S. Open down there. And there I was, you know, and Muhammad Ali was there, and John B. Kelly, the gold medal oarsman, you know, Princess Gracie's brother. So for like a 17-year-old kid, you just thought, wow, you know, you were really doing something.
And then he had added eventually a really cute porch on the front that used to have a couple rockers sitting on it. Mom added her touches with flower boxes and things like that, and he eventually put a deck out the back, and he had an acre lake that when you came out the back onto the deck, you viewed that. And the way his property sat from the road, his property was somewhat flat for about, I would say, an acre or two, and then it would go up over a mountain, and he owned 35 acres. So it was just beautiful because you'd see this lake and then you'd just see the entire mountain.
Sometimes they do these crazy things, and even they get away with it, and you got to try and talk to them and say, "Oh, cool down. Knock that shit off. That ain't the way to go. You got to go the right way." And a lot of the kids you can talk to, and they understand that. You got to talk their language, number one. And I think you have to be there yourself at one time or another in order to get them to understand. And you have to let them know that you've been there too. You know, you can't say that I'm a saint, I'm like a priest, you have to believe me because I'm good. Nah, that's bullshit. You got to tell them the bad times, the hard road that you've been down. You've been down that road. I know you're telling it, it's not worth it. And it's really not. No matter where you go, what you've done, somebody's always been there before and done it before you. So basically you try and stay out of that bad area where troubles are going to make for you. You're going to wind up in jail. People won't like you, they won't disown you, won't trust you.
I won a couple fights and went to the semifinals, and this guy Joe Marcelli fought Mike Weaver, the former heavyweight champion of the world in 1979, and you know, so when we came back, we were on an airplane, and the police were waiting for us at the airport, and I looked at Marcelli. I said, "Did you do anything, man? You know, to get arrested?" I said, "The cops are out there waiting for us, for the airport, the Upper Darby Police," and so when we get off the plane, you know, the superintendent of police, Conroy, says, sat there shaking me in Marcelli's hand, and he said, "Get in the car, we're going to have a little parade for you." You know, they drove us through 69th Street with the sirens and all that. And so all these things were, well, we were like heroes, you know.
A real man? Well, a real man is one that is ready to go to war, not nammy-pammy. He's ready to do anything that it takes to win. And that's the whole thing about it, is we don't retreat. Marines don't retreat. They just keep going forward.
When the Vietnam War broke out, shortly before, his nephew, who was my mom's sister, had joined the Marine Corps, and he went in. And I think for Dad, having the experience that he had in past wars, and suddenly realizing that Michael, his nephew, was there, who was only 18, 19, and now he being 40, thinking, my God, these are just kids. I've got to go and help them. I've got to bring my experience to them so that they'll stay safe. And I think that his motivation was to do just that, not only for just Michael, but for all the kids that were there.
We all went down to the airport. We sat in the concourse for a while, and there was a lot of people down there that left with us. Some of his friends from the police force. My mother, I think my grandmother was there. February 28th, 1967. Hi, Ed. Here it is Tuesday already, and things out here are shaping up fine. We now have 165 men, and we can start our training. My job is to get them in good shape in 3 weeks. I have been running since I arrived, and my legs feel real good. Tomorrow and every day after, I will get these boys up and run for 2 miles before chow. By the way, I was very proud of you down at the airport, and don't be ashamed because you shed a few tears. The reason you couldn't see mine is because I had my sunglasses on. Take care, Eddie, and try to help the little ones out whenever you can. Lots of love, Dad. February 28th, 1967. To my little girl, yes, you are right again, Kathy. All wars are stupid. And remember, all wars end. It's just like when you have an argument with your girlfriend. You have words with each other, and then it's over. Girls and people are just like countries. They do the same thing. When someone picks on David, and you help him, that's just like our country helping a little country like Vietnam. As long as people say bad things about each other, there will always be wars. So we will just have to learn to live with them and try to do right by others. Good night for now, Pumpkin. Lots of love, Daddy. Basically, I guess, while he was away, life kind of went on fairly normally.
it was not what I expected, you know, being we were honed to a razor's edge. We were 19, we were spoiling for a fight. We wanted to fight. We wanted to take our fight to the enemy. And you've got to be careful what you ask for because you get it. And,
May 6, 1967. Hi, hon. I received 2 letters from you today. One was written on the 7th of April, the other on the 28th. Our mail has been a little fouled up due to us moving around quite a bit. But I think it will start coming in more regular now. When we first came to Vietnam, we were near a town of Quang Tri. We were on an operation of clearing the VC from around the coast. On that operation, we had 1 killed and 14 wounded, which wasn't bad.
during the middle of Beacon Star, I think it was around noon, for reasons unknown to any of us, our COs told us to saddle up, get your equipment and everything together, and board helicopters because we were going to this place called Quezon. We were all in line receiving ammunition, grenades, sea rations, medical stuff. And I remember jets working out on a hill. I mean, they were bombing away on a hill. It turned out to be H-61. And just napalm every 15 seconds was hitting the hill. 600-pounders every 15 seconds hitting the hill. 20-millimeter cannon fire from jets hitting the hill. In between, and you know, we're standing there looking up at this hill just being torn. I mean, it was a beautiful green mountains. Vietnam's a very beautiful country, was. And when we first observed the hill, it was covered with green foliage, and by the time we got there, it was brown dirt and splinters. And I remember one of the guys standing really close to Ed, and he asked, he says, "Hey, Sarge," he says, "where are we going?" And Ed, in his own, you know, straight, squared away way, he says, "You see where those jets are working out on that hill up there?" He said, "That's where we're going, boys. They're softening it up for us."
Then the shit hit the fan north of Quezon, and we were flown over to help the 9th Marines. There was a company trapped on Hill 861 with their wounded and dead for 2 days, and they couldn't get out.
Well, we laid down on the crest of that hill for 2 days before I think it was 2 days before we moved up and hit it. And I think the 3rd day we moved up and hit the hill, but it was so much, it was really blown apart. There was hardly any enemy at all up there. They all busted out caves and bunkers, and there was a few dead Marines up there that we gathered up and shipped back. And we waited till the next morning. We were going to assault down the hill for another hill. And as we proceeded down the next morning, there was another outfit in front of us. And they walked into a big ambush, and we watched the whole battle.
Kilo 33 just walked into a terrible ambush. I mean, they killed a lot of Marines. And they pulled back. They bombed the place. Little valley, and as it slopes up to 881 South, the terrain was, again, very pretty. And you know, I remember seeing a live wild parrot flying across the valley in the middle of a firefight, and I'm like, oh my God. You know, it was just surreal that you would see such things and all that blood and crap.
The next morning we were going to go down and we were going to attack the hill. And there was a fellow by the name of Bob Handy who approached me and said, "Listen, do you mind if I tag along with your outfit?" I said no. And at that particular time I thought he was a newspaper people or something like that. I didn't really know who he was. And I said, "Sure, stick around," you know. So we moved on down the hill and moved off of the hill we were on, and we're going up a valley, a crest. And the next thing I know, we hadn't gone maybe 100 meters, and all hell broke loose.
The vegetation and the foliage was only a single canopy at the time. I'm talking shrubs and brush like you see in people's yards and what have you. And further on, it was triple canopy, 100-foot high, 3 layers of jungle, and you couldn't see from me to you. I could hide 15 people, 4 foot away from where the camera is, and you couldn't see a single one of them. And if they were adept at camouflage, you never would see them. You'd walk over them before you'd ever know that there was a human there. Ed and those guys swept down. Now, any Marine can tell the back of another Marine's head. If he was in a group of 1,000 people, he could say, "That's Ed Crawford. I know by the back of his head." You see, you just know. And you know his voice. Myself and this other Marine, Tony Liba, we saw Sergeant Crawford leading his platoon out through what looked to me like a relatively open area. And all of a sudden, a sound that you can never forget.
One of the new lieutenants, he kept yelling for my troops to pull back and pull back, and I was pissed off because once you get into an ambush, you either got to bust through the ambush or work the flank of an ambush to get around it. And once you pull your troops back, they call you put you back into a kill zone. And this lieutenant was calling my troops to pull back, and I was saying, no, don't pull back. You're going back into the kill zone again. We've got to go to the left. And it's my decision whether to bust through the center or attack left or right. And I made the decision to move left. And this lieutenant kept calling the guys back, and some of the kids were calling back. They were listening to him. So he caused unnecessary casualties.
The 50 caliber. It fires a projectile about the size of your thumb. It's big around as a nickel, and it started opening up and just bad. Killed. Some guys knew. God dang it. And
What about Ed?
well, it disappeared in a cloud of dust. I mean, as soon as the 50 opened up, Lieutenant Hackett had a hole in his chest that you could see through, literally. And he took it straight on. Bivens, the radio man, same thing happened to him. So they lost communications with everybody. They're out there by themselves. And Tony and I are watching Ed, and from across the valley, we could see just an eruption of dirt. I mean, there's Ed, and then there's dirt, and Ed's gone. And then you feel a little shock wave, and then you hear the sound of the explosion. And I'm like, oh my God, that's Sergeant Crawford. He's gone, he's dead. And blew his pack off of him, blew some stuff off of him, but he still had his web gear, 782. Canteens, knife, all that stuff. And he had his weapon, and he gets up. I mean, he's staggering around. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a tough old bird. And he continued to press the attack forward to where the 50 was. And this 50 will take, I was shot at with a 50 caliber machine gun. It'll take a section of dirt 3 foot long away. If you're hiding behind that section of dirt, you're going away with it. And he assaulted that machine gun, the 50 caliber machine gun that was tearing these boys up. He threw a couple hand grenades at the 50 caliber machine gun and killed the crew, silenced the gun. And from where he was, he had his M16, and he was still firing it. And I saw him. Tony and I both saw him go down. He got his weapon shot out of his hands, or I don't know if it was empty or he threw it down. But later on, I've learned that it was shot out of his hands, and the bullet deflected, went down in his thigh. And he just, I mean, we could see the blood. I mean, his leg turned black. It was wet, you know, from our vantage point that we could see it. And he went down again. So I'm get a canteen shot off of his web gear. I mean, bullets, tree leaves, limbs, things falling all around him. And in all of this, I could hear his voice, and he was yelling. This is what I thought. I didn't learn until about 16 years later what he was yelling, but I thought he was yelling, "Fucker, where are you? Where are you?" And I thought, man, this is a tough Marine. He's challenging them. He's saying, "You fuckers, where are you? I'm coming to get you." You know, well, one of his boys was named Fletcher, and Fletcher had gone down immediately in the initial burst, and Fletcher was wounded, and he was looking for Fletcher, and he was saying, "Fletcher, where are you? You know, I'm coming to get you and pull you out of there." And Fletcher had already been removed from the battlefield, but Ed didn't know that, and Ed was still out looking for this kid out in the kill zone.
Well, we get a phone call from headquarters Marine Corps to notify us, and then we have to make a personal notification to the next of kin. Once that notification is made, we call headquarters Marine Corps back, let them know that we've made the notification. They in turn send a follow-up telegram out to the next of kin and back to our unit. We're the only branch of the service that notifies personally.
And he had another guy with him. It turned out to be a CIA agent by the name of Bob Handy that was traveling with him. And I think maybe you know the story about Bob, super guy. And about that time, up from the ground, you know, Ed has no weapons. He's got his web gear on with his grenades attached to him, but basically he doesn't have a weapon left. And a guy pops up out of the ground, which is a spider trap, and Ed scrambles and picks up his e-tool. Now, e-tool is a shovel with a handle, long wooden handle on it. There's a famous photograph, a painting done by Colonel Charles Waterhouse that shows, and the title is "The Hill Fights at Khe Sanh." And in it, you'll see a Marine killing a North Vietnamese soldier with a shovel with an e-tool. That's Ed Crawford. That story spread. Ed was gone. He was removed from the battlefield because of wounds, and that story still went on about Ed killing this guy with the e-tool. Well, he swung, missed the guy because he was coming out of the ground, and he actually got him on the back swing and just turned his head into a pink mist.
We got in a hole. I know aerial, I think planes come over and started to bomb us, and I got in a hole, and Andy was on top of me, and he wrote his name on the back of my jacket. And when the shit gets real, he got down below, and I got on top of him. I wrote my name on the back of his jacket. And I said, "Look, if something happens to me, I'll see your parents, and you can see my kids anyway."
I had the utmost pride for these lads. When the chips were down, they didn't fall apart. They rallied together and got stronger.
I got wounded and go back to the ship and put me on a chopper. I take my jacket off and I wrap it up, and because I don't want to lose his name and addresses on the back of my jacket, and I send it home.
Because of another incident that happened right subsequent to that, when Ed went to the hospital ship, the USS Princeton, to recover from wounds from being shot in the thigh there at 881. While he was recovering, a corpsman came into the sick bay and asked, he says, "Is there anybody here that knows anything about booby traps?" And Sergeant Crawford says, "Well, sure, I do." They said, "Come help us. We have a serious problem." Well, in the morgue, a dead Marine had been brought in. He had a terrible head wound, and his head was, his skull cavity was open, and the North Vietnamese had stuck a hand grenade down inside of it. You've got to appreciate where the morgue was on the USS Princeton at the time. It was on the sick bay level, on the hangar deck level, where they store oxygen, ether, and the gases for surgery. And had a detonation occurred there, that whole room would have been a blowtorch and just cut the ship in half there. Ed went in and recovered and disarmed the booby trap, the grenade out of the Marine's head, tossed it over the side of the ship where it detonated harmlessly.
When I come back later, the entire house was filled with people. Apparently, the Aunt Marie had notified whoever, all that was concerned, and when I got there, the house was full. However, Joan, his wife, had not returned yet with Kathy. So I waited for Joan to come back. Well, she finally arrived, and when she saw me, why, her only concern was, is he dead or alive? And I told her that he was fine.
I went home and saw his father, and I told him that his son was doing well. I told him we were in a couple of hairy situations, but everything looked great, and he should be coming home in a year. His time will be up. And I don't know, I think it was 6 months after that, and he got killed. He got shot in the head. He got killed. And the father called me up and asked me if I would come out to Eau Claire, Michigan, and view his son's body. He says, I just can't do that. And being as I had been out to visit his father earlier, I said, certainly I'll come out. And so I flew out there, and I viewed the body, and I went back and told his father that, yes, that's your son. And I tried to tell him as nice as it was. He got it, you know, it was a clean kill. How can you tell somebody it's nice? But
I was going to end the letter, but I better not waste the paper. Anyway, I want to tell you how much I love you, and that the months seem almost impossible to wait around before I can hold you in my arms. It's strange how much you miss one another when you're really apart like this. But I guess it's God's way of making one realize how much you really love each other. I'm sure that with a little more luck and God's will, we will all be together again before we know it. And it will all seem like a dream that never happened. I have to end this letter, sweetie. I find myself a little choked up, and that's bad for my morale. Give my love to the children, and a big kiss from me to them. All my love, Ed.
The news was a ritual at that point. There was one instance, that we were watching television, and next thing you know, Mom spotted Dad because of a silver ring that he's always worn since the time he went in the service. In fact, he bought it, I think, in China. And the way the camera hit him, it hit his ring, and it just kind of glared. And she immediately said, there's Daddy, and we all were right at the TV watching, and he was, at that point, helping another soldier into a helicopter that had been wounded. And apparently, within minutes, they were fired upon, and he got hit, and the cameras just went dead.
May 17th, 1967. Dear Joan, I received a telegram about Mike this morning, and I just don't know what to say. If only I could have gotten into his unit, maybe it would have been different. Who can say? One thing for sure, though, I was going to go to confession before I left the ship, but I'm not now. Where does it get you? When all this stuff starts going off around you, prayers don't save you. It takes the good with the bad. And when a man chokes up with fear, he usually dies. Well, I went overseas in September of 71. No, yes, September 71. I was overseas, first went to Okinawa, spent some time in Okinawa, went on board float with the 9th Marines off the coast of Vietnam. In April, we had orders to go into a very remote area of northeast Thailand. Here's the part I want you to understand. If they don't send me home, I'm going to try and stay with this outfit. My sole purpose was to come and fight a war. I don't like it no more than the next man out there. I'm not bragging or anything. but these kids respect me, and I would be letting them down. I know I owe my family everything I can possibly give them, but these guys are all alone, and their parents want them back. If I can help them a little more, it's worth it. I do hope you understand. As for myself, I got it in the other leg. It was a piece 4 inches long and 1 inch wide. It got into the muscle of my right leg. I'm doing fine now, but I may have to be here a little longer than last time. Give everyone my love and tell the children I'm always thinking about them. Lots of love to you, baby, and keep a strong upper lip. Love, Ed and Dad.
Friday, May 26, 1967. Hi, honey. I received your letter today of the 21st and was so glad to hear from you. Don't you worry about the ordeal I had to go through, because I believe yours was so much worse. Your news about either Oki, Japan, or home was so good. Of course, I do hope and pray they will send you back to the children and me. And of course, if that be impossible, I would rather know you are safe in Oki or Japan. But then again, I do understand how you feel about staying with those boys. I will understand, hon, completely if you choose to stay. As a mother, I would sure feel secure if one of my boys were with a man like you. I have always left these decisions up to you, as I know you will take the best road and make a go of it. I guess I am shook to a point, but you always told me to keep my chin up, and I've tried real hard. I have all my faith in you, for I know you will return safe as you promised. I can only say I'm sorry, and I'm very proud to be your wife. All my love, always, Joan. I just remember thinking that it must really hurt. It must really hurt. I guess I wanted to be there to help him, because he was my hero from the time I was a little girl. I just wanted to be his. I wrote to him, and I also wrote to the president and asked him to let my dad come home. It was hard. It was very hard. Because in the meantime, we had discovered that my cousin had died. And I think the realization of that made me finally realize that he could die too.
He's wrapped up like this, and Ed says, he comes in sick bay, and he says, hey, he says, have you guys written home yet? And we go, well, we're trying to catch up. We have like 3 weeks of mail. We're going to catch up, and then we're going to write home. He says, I'll take you into Subic Bay, and you can go to the phone bank, and you can phone home, tell your parents and everybody how you are. I'm going, oh, cool. I don't have a uniform aboard this ship. I'm on the hospital ship. He said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I said, how about a Liberty card? No biggie, I'll take care of it. Ed Crawford, when he says that, you know it's done. I'm in the ICU section of the deal. I can't walk. I haven't walked and didn't walk for 2 months after that either. So he comes down, gets us, gets me, gets Tony, gets another guy named Joe Rockman. He's got peppered all over with shrapnel. It looks like something out of a horror magazine. And we get these uniforms. It takes us like 45 minutes to get dressed. And he gives us these freshly typed up Liberty cards. And then, I don't know where he stole a pair of crutches, but I'm on a pair of crutches. And we get to the gangway where a young Navy Lieutenant J.G. is like, you gotta be kidding me, Sergeant. Where are you going with this band of guys? We look like mummies. And steel stitches sticking out of our pants and everything. And he says, they got Liberty cards, sir. They're going to make a phone call home. So we go, oh my, oh, he says, okay, go down. At the bottom of the gangway, there's a boat you have to get in to ride to the pier. You get off the pier, you step up there, and the first thing we see is a Navy staff car, a station wagon, United States Navy on it. And I thought, oh man. I said, God, I wish we could have that car. And he said, that's our car. And I said, Ed, how did we rate a Navy staff car? He said, don't worry. He says, I arranged it.
Hi, Daddy. Mommy probably told you about what I did. I wrote to the president, and he answered me. not exactly the president, but the Secretary of War, and I was so happy when I received the letter when Mommy got it in the afternoon. She raced right up to school to show it to me. She was so excited that she had to open it before I was there. I don't blame her. I couldn't even hardly wait to get the letter out of the envelope. He said he might be able to get you home. I hope so. I pray that he does every night. I'll write you again tomorrow. Love and kisses, Kathy.
When I got out of the Marine Corps, like most people getting off of active duty at that point in time, it was bad. I mean, people would spit on the soldiers coming back, the Marines, the sailors, the civilian population. I mean, it was bad.
He disappears with the car. We make our phone call home and stuff like that. We never saw the staff car again. It was, I'm sure, removed. We go up, make our phone calls. We go up to this brand new made Navy enlisted club that had a ceiling to floor, wall to wall mirror, just like these here in the gym. And as soon as I walked in, on crutches, and Tony's got his arm in a sling, Savard's got, Rockman's got wrappings all over him. I'm going, gosh, if a fight ever broke out here, the first thing to go would be those mirrors. 2 hours later, a fight broke out. First thing to go was those mirrors. There were spider webs everywhere, and I lost one of my crutches in the fight and just left the other one. So they get us out as some Navy guys are coming in. Ed hustles us into a Scotia cab, which is a very small cab, and takes us back down to the to Longapole Harbor to get back. We had now missed the Liberty ships because we only had Cinderella Liberty. Whenever he thought about filling out the Liberty cards, he put Cinderella Liberty midnight, thinking we'd all be home by midnight. Well, it's about 10, 15 minutes past midnight, so now we're all liable to be AWOL, and we are bleeding from head. I tore all the stitches out from my left mid-thigh down. I was soaked in blood. All of Tony's steel stitching had been taken out of his arm. He was literally dripping blood, and Savard, the holes in Savard, Joe Rockman's face and everything, where he got punched, they started bleeding again. And Rockman, we're ahead of him, and he gets bit in the rear end by a dog and gets puncture wounds on his butt, and we don't have a boat to get back to our ship from, and we're certainly not going to swim, you know. And so Ed says, stay right here. There's one boat right there. It was the Admiral's barge.
Were you in the Army, Navy? No, I was in the Marines. You were in the Marines? You know, that's the kind of response that you get. Like, holy cow, you were in the Marines?
He says, Seaman, he says, I'm commandeer. He says, oh, I need this boat to take us to the Princeton here, or Tripoli. And he says, I'm sorry, Sergeant, this is the Admiral's barge, and we're awaiting the Admiral to return so that he can go to his flagship. And he says, you don't understand. I'm a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. These Marines are terribly wounded, they're bleeding and everything, and they need to be on that hospital ship right now. And he says, we're coming aboard. And we came aboard, we bled all over the Admiral's barge. This guy took one look at it, he says, oh my God. And we're trying to explain to them what happened, and they take us to the ship, and we get aboard ship, and now we have to climb up the gangway. I can only do it with one leg because this leg is shot, and we're slipping because we're pretty bloody. We get to the ship. Ed says, peel off all your uniforms and stuff. You go into the head, the bathroom, and lay down like you slipped in the blood and you tore your stitches open. Tony, you do the same. Say you were trying to help him up, and I mean, we had this whole story concocted so that the corpsman wouldn't be ticked off at us, and the doctors that had done all the work to stitch us up. So, and he says, I'll go get the corpsman. So here in rushes the corpsman. They go, what happened? I said, oh, this guy wanted to go to the bathroom by himself, and he said, my God, you're going to lose your leg, and now you're trying to walk. And they kind of got on to us, but it wasn't as bad as what it would have been if we had told them we'd been in town drinking and calling on the phone and been in a big fight. And so that's the kind of guy he is. He was taking care of his boys, making sure we could call home.
He came home, it was in the summertime. I'm not exactly sure the date, but it was a great reunion, to say the least. It was terrific. A much happier reunion than it was being at the airport when he left. Yeah, I have a beautiful picture that was taken at the airport of myself and my mom and I hugging him out on the runway right after he came off of the plane, and I just treasure that because the look on her face was one of relief. You know, he's back, he's home. I don't think I understood that expression fully until I matured myself and had children of my own.
She got hot wax.
Present?
Get it, get it, get it. Hambo, Hambo, where you at? There you go, Hambo. Dog it. Come on, Dave, one more time. Give it to him.
Raise your right hand. I, David Crawford,
I, David Lee Crawford,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution
that I will support and defend the Constitution
of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States
that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States
and the orders of the officers appointed over me,
and the orders of the officers appointed over me,
according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Say hello, John.
Hello, hello, Joan.
Need that gel, need that button, because that's going to be buttoned right.
Oh, it stays like that. This is button?
Yeah, that button.
To be a Marine, this question's probably been asked to me a million times, and to most Marines that I know. Being a Marine isn't how far you run, it's not how many push-ups you can do or how many pull-ups you can do. Being a Marine is in your heart. You have a saying called Semper Fidelis, which is Latin for always faithful. And that's to yourself, your God, and your Corps.
I had an English teacher once say that great men are defined by paradox. And Ed, in a way, is a package of paradoxes. So I think he's a great man. The paradox is he is openly contemptuous of expressing sentiment, but he may be one of the most sentimental people I've ever met. He's an unbelievable cynic, and at the same time, he's very much a patriot, very much believes and lives the ideals of being a Marine. Same time of being a cynic, he's a true Marine officer in which you're taught to care for your men. So it all works together. And also, I don't know how you're being compassionate and you can be an absolutely ferocious warrior, but he is at the same time. So he is a package of paradoxes.
This one here is a Armed Forces Reserve, organized reserve, meaning that he has spent time in the reserves. The next one is a Good Conduct Medal. You get this for having so many years continuous service with nothing wrong happen to, not doing anything bad or wrong or anything like this. The next four are your highest personal awards that he would receive. This would be a Navy Achievement Medal for different actions. Each star indicates that he received another award. So this one would be 3 Navy Achievement Medals that he received. The other one up is a Navy Commendation Medal, which you can receive during peacetime and wartime. You'll see the V up here, a device, what they call it. That means it was received during wartime and Navy Achievement. The following one is the Purple Heart. This is received for being wounded in the time of war in the face of the enemy. And as you can see, he has 4 stars plus the medal are 5 Purple Hearts. The last one is the Bronze Star. The V is for valor, again in combat, and for actions. I believe this was for actions in the Korean War.
I have to say that once you get into combat, you don't ever question whether or not there's morality in killing people. Once you get in combat, it's life or death, survival or not. So that's really ground into number one. Number two is once you get in combat, generally the U.S. has been in combat since even with World War II with enemies that are horrific, from the Japanese to the North Koreans to the Vietnamese to the Germans. And when you've seen like I did, I was in Vietnam once and they went through an orphanage, shooting and grenading all the kids in it. I think they did that so that you react, and we reacted, and I think Ed's seen that. And he's seen the sort of horror and implacability and evilness that can exist in enemies. So that's the second thing that drives you. The third piece that drives you is your loyalty to your men. Laterally, down, up, the men who serve under you, the men who serve over you, and the men who serve beside you. So you kill to stay alive, you kill because you don't like them, because you've seen them do terrible things. You know American servicemen generally don't. And lastly, you do it so that because your buddies are counting on you.
Shit happens, that's all. No, I don't know. So yes, I have no regrets about killing any people like that. No regrets whatsoever.
Okay, this red and silver bar here, that's a chief warrant officer. It's a specialized rank within the field of infantry. And you can tell it's in the field with infantry because this is an exploding bomb, which indicates that he was in the infantry. He was the 196th, what they call Chief Warrant Officer Gunner, promoted into the Marine Corps. It's very rare to see one of these. I've spent 24 years in the Marine Corps. I've only ran into 3 of them in my entire career. In order to get this, you have to have at least 15 years in the Marine Corps. You've had to have been a platoon sergeant, a weapons instructor, weapons platoon sergeant. You have to be the rank of gunnery sergeant to receive it. It is the hardest rank to achieve. There are more generals than there are gunners in the Marine Corps.
If you were to look in Webster's dictionary under United States Marine, it would say, see Ed Crawford for details. This guy is the epitome of the Marine Corps.
You really can't describe it. It's just something you hold inside you. And basically, no one can take it from you. It's something you earned. And I can't put it into words.
Something like this. You know, my cousin, my other cousin, my uncles, my grandfather,
a certain camaraderie about it. You share a certain bond with them more than just your friends or anybody else. You have that tight-knit kind of relationship that just holds you together. It's something special. Maybe the man I am today. Needed the discipline.
Since as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a Marine. I mean, there was Marines all around my family. My father, when he went to Vietnam, my brother went to Vietnam, my cousins went in. And I just couldn't wait till the day that it was my turn.
I started a masonry company in probably 1988, and I now have about 40 employees. We do a few $1 million worth of work a year. And I mean, leaving school at 16 years old, leaving Ireland at 16 years old, probably left school when I was 15 years old. Doesn't make any sense how that should happen. But I really believe with Eddie's guidance for the years that I was around him was a big part of the reason where I am today.
You know, one of my greatest accomplishments is not here in the ring. You know, it's not here in the gym. You know, it's not necessarily when I'm sitting in the corner and one of my guys is fighting and he wins. You know, a Golden Gloves trophy or a Middle Atlantic championship, or he gets a shot to go to the Olympic trials. You know, some of my greatest accomplishments are I'm in a supermarket, you know, and some guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, coach, how you doing?" And he's no longer a 15, 16, 17, or 18-year-old guy. He's a 25 or 26-year-old guy. And, you know, what are you doing? Well, I got a job with Vanguard. I'm selling stocks. You know, I'm married. I got a baby. You know, how you doing? How's the gym?
Chesty Puller is one of the main heroes of mine because I served under him and I knew him. I trained his young boy out of boxing. Another thing was, it may sound strange to you, but and maybe other people, but John Wayne was a big hero of mine. And John Wayne was never a Marine.
I was in a bar up here in Upper Darby, or Drexel Hill, called the Waverly Tavern one night in the wintertime, and I was low on funds. And he was a motorcycle cop at the time. And I gave him a call. I said, "Buddy, I need 20 bucks. The next thing I see is a motorcycle coming through the doors of the saloon. Drove up to the bar, rode up to the bar, threw the 20 on the bar and said, there's your 20, Sarge, have at it."
He's a doer, and he's someone that looks around, and if he sees something that's not right, that could be better, he thinks of a way to make it better, and he does it. He just reacts naturally. And over the years, through the police department, through being on the police department, there was a number of situations and incidents that took place that, you know, he was in the newspaper for. Acts of heroism right here in his hometown. I mean, he's received many, many awards over the years from different organizations, from the police department themselves. Yeah, he became, through his actions and his deeds, Ed Crawford became sort of an icon in Upper Darby Township.
And I know my uncle was one of my heroes. In fact, both of them were. In fact, the one that was dishonorable discharged. When the war came on, he went back to the Marine Corps. And they took him back in the Marine Corps, even though he was dishonorably discharged. He went back into the Second World War. He fought in Guadalcanal. And there was a movie come out, Pride of the Marines. It was Al Sugarman, Al Schmidt, and my uncle, they worked the machine gun together. And they came back as heroes.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people that that's walking around today didn't know that someone helped them, and that person would have been Ed. So, no, Ed's a good guy. In civilian life, he helped a lot of people. And in the wars that he's been in, you know, they would call him a warrior, which he is a warrior. He's a fighter. He's a fighter. My best buddy. So I can't say I can't say nothing wrong for Ed. One of the best guys I ever had for over 55 years. My best buddy.
Actually, I'm his neighbor. I cut his grass, his daughter's grass. And he's my friend, and he's somebody I admire greatly. He was an Upper Darby highway patrolman for a lot of years when he wasn't fighting every war that came down the pike. I've always heard about Eddie Crawford. I never thought I'd meet him and then become friends with him, and that he'd sit in my living room and have coffee and have my youngest son call him Pop Crawford. You know, it's there's a lot special about that man.
My wife, we decided that we were going to try and find my father, see what he was like. And we checked the records out and found out that he was in Norristown State Hospital, which is a mental hospital. We got up there, I'm going to say it was around 10 o'clock at night. I think it might have been snowing even. It was cold. And I went up to the institution, got in, told the people who I was, showed them my ID card. And at that time I think I was still in the Marine Corps. And I says, I understand my father's here. I've never met him before. I'd like to get to talk to him. Is it possible?
I mean, I've heard people talk about what Eddie did in Vietnam and Korea and every other thing, and he's such a hero, and there's no doubt, that's undisputed, the man is a hero. But personally, I wouldn't call him a hero to his face, because I did once and he got offended. And like my father was in World War II and at Normandy, and he was a fire chief, and he did some heroic things, and people would refer to my father and say, you know, you're a hero. And my dad would get mad, and I could never figure it out, why they'd get so mad.
The personnel at the institution was kind enough to say, okay, we're going to bring him down, you can talk with him. And I can remember vaguely of being put in a room, and then they brought my father in, and he really didn't make much sense to me. He was talking about a little boy that he had, and he was living way in the past. And I don't know, it was something that he was saying how he used to be a fighter, and just didn't talk too much sense to me. And I think I was really upset about the whole matter. And I think I told my wife or my friend, I said, look, he's not making any sense. There's no good sense of me talking to him. He doesn't know me. He don't remember. I left there, I think I was a little angry. And I asked the guy, I says, look, you can take him back, I'm finished.
And I saw a show on HBO, and they interviewed men from Easy Company, World War II, that were at Normandy, and the interviewer referred to this guy as a hero, and he got the same look that Eddie got and my dad got. And the interviewer caught it and said, you know, why do you look offended? He said, because the heroes didn't come home.
Yeah. We left, and I wasn't impressed at all with him. I found out that he had syphilis, and that's what made his brain go goofy. Years later, when he died, the state came to me and wanted me to pay all his bills from the hospital. I think what it amounted to something like $60,000 or $66,000. My wife says, how did they find our name out? I says, well, remember when we went up to visit him? They kept my name and address and so forth, and they checked me out. So what happened, I had to go down to Delaware County Courthouse, go all through the records, and found out that he was committed there by the state. I had nothing to do with it, and therefore I didn't have to pay any of that money back. But there was an undertaker in Clifton Heights that took his body, and they had a viewing for him, which I never went. But I think I paid the cemetery was $60 at the time to bury him wherever they buried him. I don't even know that to this day where they buried him.
I have 3 children, and I always wanted to be a man like my father, like my godfather, like my uncles, and like Eddie Crawford. And I know I never could be.
I think I was always bitter for the fact that, you know, he left my mother at the time, and I was raised without a father, which I should have had one. And the whole situation left a bitter thought in my mind, taste in my mouth, I don't know. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I left the hospital that night. I just was angry with the whole deal, and I wasn't about to forgive him. And I guess maybe I should have, I don't know. I should have looked a little deeper into it. But, you know, as days pass, time passes on, you got to do these things right away. You can't, yesterday will never come back again. But I look back today and I say, I should have and would have, you know, the old story of life. Every day passes, you'll never regain it the next day. You can't go back.
When me and Eddie got close was when my dad died. And that was March of 2001. And I was devastated with the loss of my dad. And then God said to me, here's Eddie Crawford. And it filled a certain void in my heart. And at the Marine Corps ball last week, I got the opportunity to tell him exactly that, because I don't want any time going by without telling the people in my life what they mean to me. In the career I'm in, you don't know if you're going to come home at the end of the day. And certain things have to be said.